Hi guys and welcome to Lizzie Dean Makes. Today I am filming a short mini-series on how to get into web development and coding. The reason for this is that the number of friends and family that have come to me asking how to get involved in this is very high, and the industry is at a point where there are so many new jobs opening up all the time because every company needs to have a web presence, an online presence, a social media presence and so on. But there just aren't the number of people coming out of courses having learnt how to code. The vast majority of coders are still self-taught, and whilst there are so many resources on the web, it can be overwhelming trying to figure out what it is that you need to go away and learn in order to get started with coding. So this is what I'm hoping to do in this mini-series, is to give a brief overview of how the web works, web coding, and what skills and resources you can use to learn how to code and teach yourself for free using all of the resources that are available online. So I've previously done a video giving an overview of HTML and HTTP, how the web functions, what it's made up of, how domain names and IP addresses work, like PO boxes directing you to the server where your file is that gets displayed in the browser, and what the three separate components of most modern websites, HTML, CSS and JavaScript, are, and how you would go about putting those together to form a basic web page. In this video I want to talk more about HTTP. So HTTP is a protocol. Protocols are basically a set of rules for communicating. So just like you learn a basic set of rules for communicating politely with other people, don't shout, speak in a nice soft gentle manner without using swear words. These are rules that you learn in order to communicate with other people. There are rules for different machines to talk to different machines on the web. There are added levels of rules for more secure methods of communication. So HTTP versus HTTPS, which HTTPS is secure and encrypted, HTTP is not. So these are basically different sets of rules for how to communicate from one server to another server, or from one browser to a server. When you make an HTTP request, that is essentially your browser where you've typed in your web address and it's speaking to a server, and it's making an HTTP GET request for that web file, that HTML, CSS and JavaScript file. The server then responds back and says either yes, I've got that file, or no, I couldn't find that file, or you're not allowed to see this file. So there's various different sorts of response that the server could give. These come back with an HTTP response. So you have an HTTP request and an HTTP response, and that is one to one. So if you make one request, you're only going to get one response back. And that's always the case. If you are streaming content, that's slightly different, but we won't confuse ourselves with that. So you've made an HTTP request of the server, and the server goes and looks to see if you are allowed to see that document, if it can find that document, and if it can give you that document back. If everything's fine, you'll probably get an HTTP status code of 200 along with the document that you requested. So in the HTTP headers, it will say, yeah, that's fine, here's what you wanted. And then in the body, it will give you the HTML file that the browser will then display on your screen. If it couldn't find the document that you specified, it might give back an HTTP response with headers of 404. You'll often see this if you're on a website and you click on a link that goes to a page that's been deleted and doesn't exist anymore, and it might say, oops, sorry, we can't find that page for you, and that would be essentially a 404 response in terms of an HTTP response from the server. The body of that HTTP response when there's an error is generally either blank, or it's an HTML page that you've set up in your server settings of what to do if you give back a 404 response. It could be some text as a message, or it could be an actual HTML page. That depends on the server and the configurations of the server, but essentially it's just giving back something to tell the web page, to tell you that it doesn't know what to do about that link because the file's no longer there. The other type of message that you might get back might be an error message saying you're not allowed to see this file, or the server you're talking to is having a complete mental meltdown and can't cope with this today. And you might get back a 403 or a 500 or some other HTTP status code which describes the situation that's happening on the server and what the server is saying it is happening in that situation. So 404 is a very specific one for the file was not found. You might get a 401 or a 403 or a 415 or many other different status codes, and each one of those has a different meaning. So when you're learning about HTTP, you need to learn about the different verbs, which are the different ways of making a request, and what those types of requests are and what they're for. And then you need to learn about understanding the response the server gives you back. So this involves learning about HTTP status codes and HTTP response headers. So when you're making a request of the server, there are a variety of different HTTP verbs that you can use. So as we said before, if you want to get a web page from the browser, you use the HTTP verb get. If you want to send some information to a server, for example, if you filled in a form on a website and you want to submit that form to the server, you're probably going to be posting that form. So these are HTTP verbs. There are get, post, put, patch, options and delete, and these are the verbs for HTTP. The most common ones that you're going to be interested in when you're starting out are get and post. The primary difference between get and post in terms of how you interact with them as a programmer is that a get request is a URL, it's a file location, and at the end of it, it will have a question mark and some name value pairs. So if you do a get request of a server and you're asking to get a specific file, you might go to the URL for all the files and do a question mark, file equals XYZ. That's essentially what a query string looks like. If you want to find out more about this, try doing a Google search from google.co.uk, type in your search and then have a look at what happens in the top of the browser. You'll see that you've got google.co.uk, and then you'll have your question mark and a series of bits of information about the type of request that you made. So the information that you're sending to the server, along with the fact that you want to do a search, you're telling it what you typed in the box. You might also be telling it what country you're from, what language you're using, various other pieces of information that Google needs to know in order to give you back content that's going to be of any use to you. So it needs to know what did you want, it needs to know what language can you speak, so which sorts of web pages are worth giving back to you. If you speak English, there's probably no point giving you a page written entirely in Russian. And it also needs to perhaps have other pieces of information that Google has collected about you and what sort of search patterns you've got. You know, if you're from a particular location and you look up weather, then it might use the fact that you're in that particular location to give you weather that's relevant to you, depending on your geographical location, for example. These are GET requests to Google server, and the pieces of information that are after the question mark in the URL, these are the parameters of the GET request. So essentially that is the data that you're sending to the server. In a post request, you say you fill in a form and that gets sent to the server when you hit the submit button. Nothing will happen in the URL at the top of your browser because post functions differently. So in a post transaction, it will go unseen as far as the end user is concerned off to the server, and it will have within the body of the HTTP request, it will have headers and it will have a body section, and any data that you filled into that form will actually be in the body section as name value pairs rather than being in the URL itself. That's the prime difference between a GET request and a POST request of a server. In either instance, you will get back an HTTP status code along with some other headers from the server, perhaps telling you a bit about what you're allowed to do with this document, and then the body section of the document, which is whatever it is that the server has decided is correct to give back to you depending on the data that was given to it in that request. The other key difference that's worth noting between GET and POST is that there is a limit to how long a URL can be, where it can be handled by browsers and servers and things. So in a URL string, you've probably got a character limit of maybe 2,000 characters. And if you've got more data than that to send to the server, sending it by GET is not going to be the correct option for you. So if you've got a really long piece of information, then you want to send that to the server. You're probably going to want to send that by post, where you've got the whole body of that document. And with a post request, you can probably send upwards of sort of 10 megabytes of data, and most browsers and servers are going to be fine to handle that sort of size of data. So those are the key differences between GET and POST, and that's a little bit of information about the HTTP protocol and what it means. So it's essentially a browser or a server making a request of another server, how it sends information about that request and how it receives information about that request. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. The next topic we are going to be discussing is JavaScript, and a bit more about how JavaScript works in terms of the web. Thanks guys, bye.